organized by ACCA Pakistan and its supporting partners. Just to give you a brief overview of the Global Ethics Day, so basically it was established by the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs, and Global Ethics Day is actually an annual moment celebrated in the month of October each year to empower ethics through the actions of both individuals and organizations. This year, the Global Ethics Day event organized is based on the theme Accounting for a Better World. And this event is going to be spanning over 2 days and will comprise of 4 sessions. So there will be 2 sessions taking place today and 2 sessions taking place tomorrow. And we have senior industry leaders who will be sharing their insights and views on ethics and its importance and linkage with various elements such as the likes of ESG, technology, and sustainable economies. Before moving ahead, I would like to thank, on behalf of ACCA, I would like to thank our supporting partners for this event, the CFA Society Pakistan, Pakistan Business Council Center of Excellence in Responsible Business, Habib Bank Limited, Institute of Cost and Management Accountants Pakistan, Lahore University of Management Sciences, Pakistan Institute of Corporate Governance, Pakistan Stock Exchange, Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan, and the Sustainable Development Policy Institute. So as I have shared, this is the inaugural and the first session of the event. And the title of today's inaugural session is Rethinking Regulatory Governance with an ESG Lens. Just to share the flow of the session, we will be starting off with a keynote address, followed by a high-octane panel discussion on the same topic. So without further ado, I would now like to invite Mr. Sajid Aslam, who is the Regional Lead Public Affairs Asia Pacific at ACCA, to deliver his keynote. Just as an introduction, I would like to share, Sajid is a professional accountant by qualification and a certified board member, carrying over 25 years of C-level experience in growth strategies, acquisitions and mergers, corporate finance, governance, business development, digital transformation, and ESG. Before his current role, Sajid was heading ACCA's global public sector assignment and has also served as the head of ACCA Pakistan. So over to you, Sajid.
Thank you, Ali. And I think it's a great pleasure to have an opportunity to talk about ethics and ESG. I was at a conference last week or week before in Thailand, and we were talking about ASEAN's opportunity for ASEAN in terms of ESG and sustainability side. And some of the things which we have seen here are something which definitely worth replicating in Pakistan. I'll start with a couple of things, just starting with the introduction of ACCA. I think that's always good to remind we are what we are doing. So ACCA is almost 118-year-old organization as we speak. And ACCA has always chose to be a force for a public good. We are committed to SDGs. Out of 17, there are 9 SDGs which ACCA has adopted. We are adopting it in our own business as well as with our partners, and we are promoting the same among our members and students. And we are providing all type of content and support how the ESG in general, SDGs specifically, or sustainability for investor side and the business side, how it can be implemented in a different societies, in a different conditions, in different situations. We are a community of almost 800,000 people around the world, and that helps us to understand what's happening somewhere and how we can contribute. ACCA is always keen to contribute with the regulators, with the partners, that to build that sustainable economic environment where every business can grow and ultimately the overall national economy can grow. Like Ali mentioned in the beginning, that the area or the theme which we are running this year, and I'm sure for many years to come, is accounting for a better world. And that is based on a certain research which ACCA has conducted. And that research has given us 7 core priorities around the world, that how ACCA or the professional accounting bodies can really contribute as a force for public good. And if you look at that, they are driving sustainable business and advancing standards and regulation. That's a key part of that 7 core priorities which ACCA has. And today's session, which I'm going to pick up, it's significantly based on a ACCA 3 different research, where we are talking about the public trust in techs. There's a global perspective, and there's very specific Pakistan perspective available in that. And I'll definitely encourage everybody to look at that research report. There's a global economic conditions survey report of Q2, and there's a climate action and the accountancy profession building a sustainable future. So these are the couple of reports which we picked up to really share here. And if you look at the Asia Pacific situation, which include, by the way, Pakistan as well, so the research reflects that less than 10% of the organization have significant involved in the climate change at this stage. And there are less than 12% who are talking about their net zero target by 2050. But the most interesting thing, and that's where the biggest hope is, 67% of the employees are saying these agendas are very important for them. So that's been, organization may not be ready, but I think the awareness among the employees, the young generation, that's available, that's there, and we are hoping that they will be driving that kind of change and driving their organization to start doing something and start delivering on some of the commitments which we collectively as a nation we have made on the UN SDGs, but more importantly, save the planet. And that's another thing which came out very strongly in this one. If you look at that, so there's a regulatory impact, physical impact, financing impact. The regulatory impact is coming as very, very strong for the next 5 years. And it's the highest one if you look at Asia Pacific or any other region. That's how it's going to shape the future. So there is a certain dependency on the regulator and how regulator frame the question and the compliance or the voluntary compliance, but also providing some guidance, some framework, some directions there. There's another conversation we had a week back. We have invited some of the big groups, and we were asking them questions where they stand in terms of their sustainability journey. And significant, the question was answered in a form that unless until there is a regulatory push, there are not many organizations who are start going to work towards that. And despite that, some of the industries were export-led, and still they were waiting for the regulatory framework which can come and that can enforce the sustainability or ESG framework. This research also bring out that what accountants can do during that period, how they can contribute, and there's a lot of data analytics, reports, risk management side of it. Climate finance is another area which is coming as very, very strong. And these are the areas where accountants can start contributing and start building capacity and awareness within their own organization or even in the public sector side. There's a World Economic Report available which basically reflects that the 50% of the global GDP is dependent directly or indirectly on the nature. And if we are unable to preserve that, that's means we are creating a biggest risk for the GDP and for opportunities for generations to come and avail the same resources which we had in our time. I think that's where the ACCA uses a role of accountants or CFO as an intergenerational value preserve, the people who preserve the value for the next generation. I think this is also coming out very, very strong that some of the industry will have impact larger than the compared to some other industry. Agriculture, construction, food and beverages are some of the industries which are on the top of the list. Ultimately, if we keep it in a very simple how the nature has designed, it's all about the recycling, it's all about the circular economy. And the way the young generation coming up, right now we are talking about repair, reuse, refurbish, and recycle. I'm sure the young generation is coming up with the refuse as one of the keyword. If the products are not sustainable, they are going to refuse that. And that's one of the biggest worst businesses are running if they are not taking actions today. If you look at the call to action, some of the call to actions at a national level and some of the call to action at a regulator level, I think the biggest one is the national or regional adaptation plans and related financing. That's one of a key area where the governments have to step in and they have to start talking about the NDC and National Adaptation Plan And that will give a guidance to the country that which area they need to focus more as compared to others. And that will reflect that what kind of financing we need to really fund that national adaptation plan. And that also create a requirement how we will build the financial markets where the green bonds or the sustainability linked bonds or other financing tools can be implemented. How the banks will work and react to the different priorities once it's come to sustainability. There is a role for central bank. SCCP has got a role to really provide a certain framework. EICG has got a role here to provide a certain guidance and the capacity building. Stock exchange has got a role to provide a certain guidance to the organizations who are listed out there, that how they are going to collectively contribute towards the national adaptation plan by their own business, how the business will commit and prioritize the areas which have been identified within the national adaptation plan. Then the second part comes to the common framework where the investor, regulators, and the business have to work together, create the taxonomy, crush that greenwashing concepts which are floating around in a lot of different countries, and we have to really avoid that and have a right kind of definition for the sustainability finance for the investors, as well as for the reporting for the businesses at the same time. Then the supply chain is another area. We are seeing more and more people talking about scope 1 and scope 2, but in an international trade, my scope 1 will be becoming a scope 3 for someone. And that will create a challenge down the road in 3 to 5 years. If the trade agreements we are doing, and the way our economy is, even our export includes 60-70% of imported items, then the sustainability consideration should be part of our trade agreements. That should be part of that trade or international imports, which we are doing even for the export purpose. Policy formation, green finance, definitely there is a lot of finance which is available globally. One of a capacity which we are lacking right now, how to build the case, how to build the feasibility and submit and access that fund. Pakistan is not the country which is culprit in terms of the contributor towards the global warming or the carbon emission. We are the affectee of it. So there is a certain sympathy which exists out there that the effects which we are facing right now, and if that a part of a national adaptation plan, we can access that green funding to fund businesses as well as the national. And there's a lot of technology and data is required to make sure that whatever we are doing, that's properly captured, reported, and there's a reasonable assurance available. The auditors can really review that information and they can look after and provide an opinion on it, for which the regulators as well as the investor can rely. Again, like I mentioned earlier, the role of CFO is coming as somebody who is going to protect the value for intergenerations. And from a business and a private sector perspective, it has to be a board agenda that cannot be driven below that. The board has to start looking into the new strategy, the operational plan, even the digital transformation, and ultimately they have to validate the reporting and the disclosure. There is a lot of constraints which we are facing and we will be facing going forward if we are not looking at the sustainability as an opportunity or a risk management tool. Definitely materials and the logistic is going to be the one area which will be affected, and recently we have seen with the floods in Pakistan where the access to material or availability of material is a challenge. The second challenge is sustainable materials. It's going beyond what we can use today, how we can do the R&D and create the new materials or access the new material which are more sustainable. If the assets, we are not going to take care of that, there is a second chance that we will be writing off a lot of balance sheet assets which are no more relevant, or we cannot use that. There is a recent case where one of our industries is using gas boiler, and their customer have told them that if they have to discontinue that by 2025, otherwise they are not going to place the orders. So we are seeing this kind of customer demands coming up. But the most importantly is the eco-sensitive consumer, which is going to drive the entire change, and they have started saying refuse, and they are refusing the products which are not coming out very strongly, or who are unable to demonstrate that it's being built, produced, distributed to a sustainable route. And it's not only the case of risk management. The most important thing, there's a business case there. There's a business benefit there. And if we simplify that journey and create certain framework at a national level and the regulator really endorse those, we can start with the minimum viable compliance, something which is small thing, but that helps to start. So start with the minimum viable compliance and led to the scale of the scaling towards the opportunity side. And if you look at the key benefits, so I think valuation gains we have seen a lot around the world. Preserving the existing earning and retaining the existing customer is one of the key benefits. Talent reduction and employee productivity, we have seen significant increase there. And then staying compliant is definitely the one of the key benefits where we can really demonstrate that we are responsible citizen and we are compliant with the regulation locally as well as globally. So my last advice is from a regulatory lens and from a business side and from the investor side, simplicity should be the key. Start adopting a standardized framework, look at the viability of that adoption, and then really implement it with a pace. So from ACCA perspective, that's one of the priority, and we are there to partner and collaborate with every regulator, every business, every investor, where we can contribute help to our qualification, to our network, to our members. And this is not the agenda which any single organization, a single country, or single society can solve. It is going to take everybody, 8 billion people on the earth, to contribute to reduce that temperature, which is going to create that climate disasters, and Pakistan is the one of our affected outcomes. So thank you very much for your time, and I wish you a very great session ahead.
Thank you very much, Sajid, for your keynote and for sharing some very valuable insights. And I believe it's not just an issue in Pakistan, regarding ESG. It's obviously a global issue, and which is why we are having this conversation today, especially when we have, the likes of the regulators and the representation from the businesses as well, to see what initiatives are being taken on the ESG front and how we can work towards creating a more sustainable economy. So moving on, we are now heading towards our panel discussion on the topic regulatory governance with an ESG lens. And I would like to invite our moderator for the session, Rukhsana Narejo, who is the head of Treasury and Financial Institutions at Sindh Bank Limited. To introduce Rukhsana, she, besides her current position, is also serving on the board of Sindh Microfinance Bank and Sindh Mudarba Limited. Rukhsana is a board member of CFA Society Pakistan and has previously served the society for 3 terms at various time periods. She is an MBA and a qualified CFA charter holder. So I would like to now hand over to Rukhsana to take over and start the panel discussion. So over to you, Rukhsana.
Thank you so much, Ali. Thank you so much for the introduction. Rethinking regulatory governance with an ESG lens. What an interesting topic. Right now, we are sitting at a very tipping point in the world. I mean, when we look at Pakistan, obviously Pakistan is faced with a number of issues like climate change, also our current governance issues and everything. When we summarize all these topics and all these issues, we can all put them together into ethics, ESG, and collaboration between these 2 topics can resolve a lot of issues being faced by our nation right now. Before taking too much time, we have an amazing speakers, our panelists, who are very well-known speakers, and they carry the expertise into their own field. I would want to introduce them, and I would want to give time to audience to hear their views and to hear from them how they are deploying ESG lens and how they are striving to bring the change. Let me start with welcoming Ms. Sadia Khan. Ms. Sadia Khan has been appointed Commissioner SECP in March 2020. She is the first female to hold the position. Prior to that, she was President and CEO of PICG. Ms. Khan holds versatile career in investment banking, development finance, financial regulation, family business, and entrepreneurship. Ms. Khan has master's degree in economics from both Cambridge, Yale, as well as MBA from INSEAD. Let me welcome Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, a well-known name. She has been the only female governor so far. Dr. Shamshad has served as a federal finance minister, holding multiple economic portfolios in a caretaker government. Dr. Shamshad served as vice president, Middle East, North Africa at the World Bank and Director General at Asian Development Bank. Dr. Akhtar is recipient of Asia's Best Central Bank Governor from Emerging Markets. And she is right now serving as chairperson of few boards, Pakistan Stock Exchange, PICG, SSDC, and she is chairperson of Karadas. I would now introduce Mr. Asad Hamid Khan, who heads ACCA Pakistan. Asad is a certified director and professional accountant with over 23 years of diverse experience. Asad, before joining ACCA, has been associated with JS Investments and SEC. I would welcome Mr. Mehmoosh Khwaja, who is President and CEO of Pakistan Institute of Corporate Governance. Mr. Mehmoosh is an international business and sustainability leader with 14 years of CEO and global director experience. He has worked in Pakistan with both Unilever and Halib, in the Middle East and Europe with Henkel. He is an MBA from LUMS and has obtained his executive leadership training in strategy and innovation from MIT School of Management. Mr. Mohammad Shoaib, CFA. He is CEO of Al Mizan Investment Management Company. Mr. Shoaib is the founding CEO of Al Mizan Investment Management Company, which is the largest AMC in Pakistan. Besides being the largest, it's one of the only entirely Sharia compliant AMC. Mr. Shoaib is an advocacy chair at CFA Society Pakistan. He has, to his credit, setting up CFA Society Pakistan in 2002 and serving as its founder president. This was introduction of our awesome panel speakers who are going to talk to us today and share with us their views on this topic. My first question, I would start with Ms. Sadia Khan, who is Commissioner SCCP. I would want to hear from her SCCP's perspective on ESG in Pakistan and how regulator is looking at the topic from its regulatory lens. Ms. Sadia.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Rukhsana. First of all, I'm delighted to be here to mark Global Ethics Day with ACCA. So thank you for the invitation. Now, as far as ESG is concerned, as you know, the SCCP has been working on different components of ESG for a very long time. In fact, over the past 2 decades. When we issued our first Code of Corporate Governance in 2002, we started a journey towards a full, more holistic compliance with ESG issues. The governance journey taught us a number of lessons, primarily that we have to build the business case for a sufficient adoption within the regulated sector. Otherwise, if it's just left for regulatory impact, as Sajid mentioned earlier, very few companies have that will themselves to implement it. And we end up seeing a box-ticking approach whereby they just do it for regulatory compliance, but not in order to enhance shareholder value, which is really at the heart of ESG compliance. Now, the Code of Corporate Governance, of course, went through various iterations, and now it is in a comply and explain mode, keeping in line with what we've seen to be the experience of compliance within the regulated sector. Now, that was a G component. Then the S component in 2013, we issued guidelines for corporate social responsibility as well. The E component of ESG, of course, has taken on even more importance, and more so now with the impact of the floods. We started the journey much earlier, and we've already issued an ESG roadmap, which is available on our website. And that looks into various components of what we want to do, starting with the initiatives that we've taken and some that we plan for the future. Now, putting an economist hat on, I mean, the way we approach these issues are from the supply and demand side. On the demand side, it's often said that unless the investors themselves demand the companies to look at this, there will not be much progress. Hence, we've come up with stewardship guidelines requesting institutional investors to pay particular attention to this issue in monitoring and engaging actively with their investee companies so that ESG issues become important and pertinent in board discussions and in the policy formulations of these investee companies. So really pursuing this from a voting with your feet kind of concept. On the demand, on the supply side, we've come up with guidelines for various products, the green bonds, the gender bonds, and these are aimed at raising sustainable finance to be able to invest in renewable energy projects, in water management projects, in green buildings, to ensure that while there is demand, there is also supply of such products and avenues for sustainable finance. Now, all this is important if the investors know about it in adequate disclosures. And even the Companies Act and the Code of Corporate Governance has requirements for the board of directors to formulate policies for ESG and to disclose them both on the websites and in terms of their compliance statements. The roadmap itself starts off with doing a lot of awareness creation. Our position being, unless people are aware of it, there is enough expertise in the area to be able to come and develop standardized measurement techniques. There is no point in having mandatory reporting because there will be no standardized base for judging across companies, across jurisdictions, whether they are actually investing in these products and projects that impact the environment and for greater ESG compliance. So we are looking towards the ISP, the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is coming up for guidelines. We're looking towards the task force headed by Dr. Shamshad Hakhtar with all the stakeholders on board to really try and come up with these standardized benchmarks that will provide some basis for comparison and some basis for measurement before we take the step of making greater regulatory requirements in this and mandatory reporting in this direction. It is something to look out for the future, but for the time being, I think awareness creation is important. The buy-in is important from the regulated sector, and to ensure that we do not indulge in greenwashing when we look at these statement of compliances. We want to ensure that adequate benchmarks are there for people to be able to do the reporting according to a certain standard. So that's pretty much the way we think about it. The ESG lens is there. I take Saji's point that it is the push from the employees, from the youth that will really drive the change. And we are looking to build on that demand to try and have the momentum build up before we roll out the mandatory provisions down the road. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sadia, for sharing with us what SCCP is doing. And we are very happy to hear that SCCP is very proactive in introducing right regulations in order to encourage corporates for ESG matters. My second question would be with Dr. Shamshad Akhtar. Dr. Saba, how are organizations converging towards deeply decarbonizing new strategies for the business value chain in Pakistan?
So, Assalamu alaikum and Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's a pleasure to be here. ACCA is a partner in development with the ESG task force, and I'm delighted that we are all working closely together, irrespective of our organization. I think it's important to recognize, first of all, there is a lot of talk in the corridors that Pakistan is obviously facing cross-border issue because climate change is a cross-border problem, and it is it contributes significantly to the climate change, given that its greenhouse gas emissions are less than 1%, under 1%. But I think it's important to recognize that we have to start within our geography too. Obviously, we should demand aggressively climate finance from the UNFCCC participants because we are at the rough end. But at the same time, we have to act very responsibly in our corridors. And I say that because Pakistan is a greenhouse emissions are set to rise to 1.6 billion by 2030, which is just around the corner. It's a 540% increase over the present levels. First of all, I think before I talk about the organizations, it is a public policy imperative to fast-track decarbonization through a range of climate mitigation and adaptation programs. A little tinkering here and there will not do the trick. Our best bet would be to adopt fiscal support, fiscal rules, fiscal instruments, carbon pricing to change the fuel mix, implement aggressively renewable policy that ought to seek to enhancing its share in the energy mix to 30% as committed in the renewable policy, and adopt a conducive legal and regulatory framework that pushes the envelope for the companies. Now, companies in Pakistan are at a mixed stage, but it's important to recognize that 27% of the companies are actually reporting on carbon targets. It's an international survey evidence that's come out recently. Companies, however, require world-class technical expertise to deliver the bold actions of setting and implementing science-based targets. So richer companies are going to be able to move fast if they are committed, but those that are at the lower end of profitability will find it hard. So finance would matter at the end of the day. But at the heart of all this lies absolutely critical area, accurate, comprehensive, and transparent data. With the support of KPMG, which has been a remarkable knowledge partner for our task force, we call it the ESG task force, it has put together ESG reporting guidelines. So we are at the first pillar of what I would call an eventual roadmap. So the ESG reporting guidelines draws its inspiration from the United Nations Sustainable Stock Exchanges work. And this will function as and when it's adopted, with, of course, all the improvisation that the participants wish, as a tool and resource to issuers listed within the Pakistan Stock Exchange. We are fortunate that we are both at PSX and at PICG, a corporate member-driven organizations. So we have to make sure on how we manage to ensure their non-financial disclosures. This is where ICAP comes in also, to move from not to move, but to complement its financial reporting with non-financial disclosures, taking into account the materiality of the actions. And we have to figure out a way for having harmonized ESG data that has to be transparent and easy to comprehend by all companies. Now, PSX hopes to further complement these ESG reporting guidelines that I have talked about to aid companies, investors, capital markets alike in making decisions that decisively contribute towards a better and safer tomorrow. And of course, we will await for SECP guidance. I haven't as yet looked at the SECP roadmap, but having learned from Sadia about it, I will immediately bother her to send me a copy of that or direct me to the website. Private sector, of course, is the principal player. It generates principally most of the output of this country. So it needs to be galvanized to decarbonize, as over long term, it will enhance corporate value proposition and improve their competitiveness. Pakistan textile companies with whom we have engaged at different platforms since the past year have worked together to understand common challenges in measuring their greenhouse gas emissions, footprints to assess the key activities that are impacting their business and environment. We have at the same time had an engagement with automobile sector and the banking sector. I must say, while all of them are now convinced that they need to move, it has to be embraced in their business lines. All of them have attended workshops by international experts. They are now getting familiar with methodologies, that there is not one methodology for reporting guidelines, and ultimately consolidation will do the trick, and international sustainability body that has been set up and during COP 26 hopefully will direct us further on how to improvise this. We have to have at a company level their net zero strategies for identifying short, medium, and long-term interventions to be taken to meet their ambitions. So PSX and PICG, I believe, were the first frontline entities to elevate across their corporate memberships the significance of decarbonization. Pakistan Environment Trust Fund is yet another platform. It's a non-corporate body. It has launched Net Zero Pakistan program and is working on an ecosystem of partnerships with the private sector to commit to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Few sectors are quite clued into the net zero emission pathways, as companies are forging alliances for addressing gaps and policy barriers. And knowledge sharing of best practices for net zero emissions, albeit resource and technology constraints are quite significant. And I wonder, while all of us will be worrying about roadmaps and the methodology, who will be the provider of the funding and technology at the end of the day, because big corporates could probably navigate themselves, but it is the value chain providers which are handling bulk of the businesses would not have the desired funding. Pakistan Environment Trust is collaborating on a few initiatives which you may be interested in, which may bear results within the next 2 to 3 years in a much more significant manner. Couple of examples are evolution of biomass supply chain to replace coal-generated steam and boilers in manufacturing companies. We are working on promoting organic cotton farming to decarbonize the industry to ensure a resilient and low-carbon supply of cotton for the textile supply chain. Corporates can now seek renewable energy certificates, which we have been able to work with an international organization to issue to Pakistan for those who have acquired the renewable stuff, so that it is recognized internationally and it allows companies to meet their renewable energy commitments internationally, even though there may be a lack of the policy regulatory framework still on the renewables, particularly the power wheeling issue is quite significant in Pakistan, which has as yet not been addressed. Now, just to conclude, I'd like to point out that Pakistan is undoubtedly working on decreasing its carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. But as I said at the beginning, right now they are low contributors, but set to grow. Government of Pakistan is pursuing strategies for combating climate change. It's promoted renewable energy policy, electric vehicles, energy efficiency, ban on a number of useless things, but also it has a billion trees plantation drive. And also in a National Electricity Policy 2021 has pretty decent accommodation of its own kind. So companies are committed to different degrees to minimizing carbon footprint, reducing the negative impact on the environment, as well as contributing towards the national target of increasing renewable renewables and decarbonization. I think everything else aside, decarbonization is a principal responsibility. We all have to single-handedly move on out of the ESG. Corporations are investing in projects on energy and water efficiency, converting energy sources to renewables. And I'm basing this based on my dialogue and evidence that I have received: ecological restoration, waste heat recovery, low carbon technologies in operations, and supply chain to reduce their environmental footprint. A number of companies have issued sustainability reports, and they are trying to reduce their carbon or environmental footprints. Regulators are also working towards developing regulations, and the disclosure requirements are being strengthened across the board. Now, finally, the last point is, of course, which standard to apply. And of course, it all depends what the jurisdictions are prepared for. But I think we all believe we know GRI, which is the latest simple thing, and the World Economic Forum metrics, and also the other standards. What would be fantastic if we could have a consolidation, rationalization, and harmonization of these standards so that we stop fumbling which is the good one. And if we have harmonization, then PSX, based on the guidance of the roadmap, could embrace it as a part of his regulatory affairs committee. And my biggest ambitions is that our regulatory affairs committee of the PSX is able to issue the guidance based on the roadmap of the SECP, but also of the learning and knowledge we have. And I'm so glad Mimersh has joined us. He's an old hand also, and he is working towards advocacy and knowledge dissemination at the PICG. So over to you all. There's so much that one can talk about, but I've kept it to bare minimum. And to talk about real implementation. Over to you all.
Thank you, Dr. Shamshad, for sharing with us ESG task force, as well as initiatives and work being done at PSX in order to encourage ESG as well as smooth financing for the companies who are looking to reduce their carbon footprint. My question right now would be to Mr. Mehmood Khwaja. Mr. Mehmood Khwaja, I would like to ask you, how will risk management and governance structures evolve in the digital age, specifically addressing cybercrime from the governance perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Rukhsana, and thank you to ACCA for giving me the opportunity to participate in this panel. So regarding your question on cybercrime and related issues, governance issues, let me first start off by saying that we did conduct a survey of the directors that we train. So we asked them for what topics these directors, board of directors, would be most interested in for us to integrate into our directors training program. And it was quite interesting that cybersecurity came up as the second most important topic for these directors. So there is clearly a need felt by the boards in Pakistan that this topic needs more understanding and integration into the board work. So that was there. And secondly, not to mention that there's also been global surveys on how global CEOs have picked cybersecurity as one of the top topics that they're extremely concerned about globally. It's one of the top topics. So the topic is very important. And the good news is that the board of directors are asking for advice on how to bring this in. So really the topic starts off by increasing their understanding board understanding on how digitalization related risks and opportunities should be integrated into board work. And I'm delighted to report that we are now working on revamping our training program, director training program, where cybersecurity will be an integral part of our of our program. And starting 2023, which is in a couple of months, we should be able to impart this knowledge to the directors who would be seeking this knowledge. And it is an essential part in terms of how risk is governed, risk is managed by the boards. So therefore, there are various topics, of course, within this in terms of how cybersecurity comes into the corporate culture. It really should become it really has to be integrated into the behaviors of our corporations. It's not just a topic for a department or a function in an organization. The CIO's role becomes, of course, extremely important in management decision making. So we are going to advise that the CIOs sit on every important business planning and strategy meetings, because the implications of business decisions go into how cybersecurity threats come towards the company. We are also going to advise companies to stay on top of legal and regulatory requirements with respect to cybersecurity, because there are certain regulations that exist and they're being updated continuously, et cetera, et cetera. So there are going to be various ways and forms of how boards will be structured and how they will manage their risks with respect to digitalization and cybersecurity. So that's going to be a big topic in the coming days for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Member, for sharing with us integration of cybersecurity at the board level and with the risk management and the efforts being put in order to strengthen it even more. My question would now be directed to Mr. Asad Hamid Khan. Asad, ACCA Pakistan and PICG have been have been very active on topics of ethics and ESG. But a lot needs to be done in Pakistan because it has just started. The awareness has just started around the topic, and ESG in itself is as old. It was old only as around. It was launched in 2005. So obviously, there's a lot need to be done internationally, but more so in Pakistan. I would want to ask your views about what ACCA is doing in incorporating ESG and ethics into the subject matter and increasing the more awareness.
Thank you very much, Rukhsana, and thank you to all the panelists. I think it has been a wonderful conversation. So we have covered multiple dimensions. So to respond to your question, I would say that there are two elements to it. One, do we have enough awareness around ESG? And secondly, you picked up around advocacy, that what our organizations like ACCA, Pakistan Institute of Corporate Governance, the Pakistan Stock Exchange, the Securities and Exchange Commission of Pakistan, and then practitioners and market participants like Al Mizan Investments, and obviously associations like the CFA Institute are doing towards it. I think if we pick up on the first element, that is advocacy, awareness. So from an awareness perspective, what I have felt, and thanks to the PICG, Pakistan Stock Exchange led ESG task force, and the conversations and the insights that we have had from our various stakeholders, is that the knowledge and the awareness element is increasing. So how has ACCA embedded that within our qualification, within our syllabus, within our conversations, within the various researches that are being picked up? So earlier you would have seen that Sajid had picked up on the specific researches that ACCA has done on its own, and also in collaboration with partners, where we embed this, I would say, policy conversation and debate within our members community first. So they share their experiences, they provide their insights. Those are collated, corroborated with other industry participants. And then we have these researchers telling us the trends, the gaps, the areas that need to be improved on. The second element is that based on these learnings, ACCA as a qualification is a very dynamic qualification simply because of the periodicity with which we review our content, our syllabus, and how we may ensure that all of this is not just ready to the current times, but also ensures that our members who are going to be the future strategic business leaders are future ready and are able to anticipate things happening in the future. So this is from an awareness perspective. Now coming to the advocacy element, so we are seeing advocacy in action at the moment. We have brought it to life along with so many partners like the CFA Society. We have this ESG task force, SECP issuing this wonderful ESG roadmap, which I think takes a very high level view and then provides the pillars and the framework in terms of how organizations can start thinking about it. Other areas being, I would say, see how the Pakistan Stock Exchange and ACCA has partnered in terms of bringing this conversation to our members, to our future members, which are students. So putting all these two things together, you see, it's all about branding ESG as well. That what is ESG? Why is ESG necessary? And what benefits does it bring? If it is not applied or embraced or adopted, what sort of opportunities and risks does it bring in? You see, contrary to the perception that it is a cost center, it requires a lot of cost which will not be recovered. I think research has proven that it has now being considered as a profit center simply because of the competitive advantage that it brings to organizations in terms of the three verticals. One is the value creation in terms of their growth, the innovation, reducing their costs. The other is around the brand and reputation. And the brand and reputation is, you see, increasing that trust with the organization in our dealings as employees, as customers, as creditors, as investors, as the complete value chain. And last but not the least, you see how it improves the resilience of an organization. The sector in itself, we have seen multiple disruptions happening over the last 36 months, starting with COVID. So we saw many cycles, many waves. We saw where we were completely remote. We were there when we were completely in lockdowns. Then we went into smart lockdown. So how the organizations could learn from this, and also in terms of the recent climate action change related disruption that we saw through unprecedented floods and rains. So if we are able to bring out the opportunities coupled with, and by those opportunities are there to mitigate the risks, then we believe that we would have created that awareness, we would have created that advocacy, which would lead to then the third part, which is the adoption and implementation. So I'll just touch on the broad contours that we feel will help organizations. So these were touched in Sajid's slide as well. So I'll just summarize those. So there are four broad contours to the organizational implementation. So first one being the governance, then how we strategize that. Third is how we are able to manage the risk. And the fourth one is that all this in place, how we are able to create metrics and targets that we're able to track and then create this progress where from the time we got the buy-in from and also awareness for our strategic levels like the board, it is implemented to a level that it embeds into our day-to-day affairs within organizations, is bite-sized and trackable so that we are able and tracking not just in terms of progress or process, but also in terms of impact. So I would like to stop over here and hand it back to yourself. Thank you.
Rukhsana, you're on mute.
Yes, Rukhsana. You're on mute.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Asad. My next question is for Mr. Shoaib. Shoaib Saab, due to their sheer size, AMCs in Pakistan are now as big as banks. They are the market movers when it comes to investment, be it corporate debt or share market. I want to ask you, is AMC industry thinking about launching ESG-oriented mutual funds, or is there any encouragement being provided to analyze the companies from the ESG efforts perspective?
Thank you, Rukhsana. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to be on this August panel. Before I answer your question, Rukhsana, let me try to highlight what is happening at the global scene as far as the asset management industry is concerned. So if you look at globally, there's an increasing trend that the asset management companies or the mutual funds are following ESG integration into their investment strategy. And so much so that let us leave aside the developed world like the US and Europe. In fact, Europe is even ahead of USA in this case. But even we talk about India, what we have seen that there are about 13 mutual funds which are operating as ESG themed funds. And if you look at the global studies, Harvard Law School has done a study as like in 2022, where it did some study and survey, and this is the survey they repeat. So in 2021, when this survey of global investors, 26% of the global investors indicated that ESG is central to their investment decision making. When they did this survey again in 2022, it is increased to 28%. And if you look at the global asset under management, which are under ESG integration, they are about close to about $41 trillion. So first of all, there's an increasing drive from the investors to look at the investment from the ESG lens. I was talking to one of the fund managers from Fidelity a few months ago, and he said there's more and more increasing demand from the investors, and they ask this question whether ESG factors are integrated in the investment decision making. And this is something Sadia also mentioned, that the demand has to come from the investors. Now, the demand will come when there's an awareness, and this is something that we are trying to do from the mutual fund industry, also from the CFA Society Pakistan forum as well, and from the forum of Al-Mizan Investment, that we are trying to create awareness about the ESG factors. If you look at the asset management industry, there are three aspects of ESG here. One is the internal aspect, and that is more the social factors like the gender diversity, fair treatment of employees, good governance, internal good policies. And then the other side is the external side, which is how to deal with the investors. Now, the social factors also become very important. And as far as Al-Mizan is concerned, it's being the only and the largest Sharia compliant asset management company. I'm proud to say that the social factor is very, very important for us, because the Islamic finance is very, very closely related to the ESG factors. And the investors are certainly looking for investment avenues which are complying with their faith as well. So that is the social aspect that we provide. If you look at the financial sector in general, one of the beauty of the mutual fund is that from the social perspective, they don't differentiate between the small investor and the big investors. So that is also a very important factor in this case, because irrespective of the size of the investor, every investor gets the same return if it is in the same fund. This is unlike other financial services, for example, the banks, where the largest investors or the largest depositor get a higher rate of return. So this social factor is very, very important. It's to the heart of the mutual fund industry or the asset management side. About the third aspect, which is integration of the ESG factors into investing, this is an important area where I believe the industry is working very keenly, and we are following very keenly the roadmap that has been kind of brought about by SECP, and we are very I would say we're very happy to work closely with SCCP on that. Also, I'm also a member of the ESG task force from PSX and PICG. And one of the important areas for development which is needed is the ESG factors and ESG index. And that is very important to determine, to ensure that when we talk about the ESG integration into our investment decision making, it is not just a lip service and there's no greenwashing involved. It's not just ticking the box. So it is very important that we have a very clear direction, very clear standards, just like we have a Sharia compliant index where companies are either Sharia compliant or they are not. And similarly, we need to develop indices where we can say that this company is following the ESG criteria and it has some X score on the ESG criteria. The other company has got a Y score, and the investors can see for themselves as to which companies are actually focusing on ESG or not. So this is a very important area which we are very happy to work with the regulator, with SCCP, with PSX and PICG from the CFA Society Pakistan forum as well. We have the benefit of having some global expertise at the CFA Institute level as well. And this can be a very helpful opportunity for us to take Pakistan to the next level in the ESG integration into investing. As about your question, so certainly we are working on launching an ESG fund, and we are developing our own internal methodology. We are happy to share it with others, and I think there's a teamwork required between the regulators and between the industry so that we have a comprehensive framework available. There is an ESG index available, and based on that, the companies can be identified. Because the moment the investor understands that how ESG factors are important and we create more awareness about it, there will be more demand for it. And I see a bright future for that. I would stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shoaib, for sharing with us what mutual fund industry and asset management companies are doing in order to encourage more ESG investment. We have some time left for a few more questions with our panelists. My next question is for Ms. Sadia Khan. Ms. Khan, how do you incorporate the S, social, into your business regulatory strategy? What measures are being taken to address societal issues?
Thank you, Rukhsana. As I mentioned earlier, very briefly, the S part of the ESG, we started working on in 2013 when we issued the guidelines for corporate social responsibility. Now, as guidelines, these are voluntary in nature, and the whole intention was to provide a base for the companies to engage in responsible business conduct that adds value to the community. Now, if you look internationally, there are really two main models of corporate social responsibility that are at play. In the United States, despite there being no hard law, the common practice is that companies normally set aside 2% of their profits to distribute to charitable endeavors or for projects that have the larger common good. In Europe, there's actually a hard law. The EU law mandates that companies have to invest in socially responsible businesses. And the practice is really that good practices are disseminated through integration of CSR with research, education, training. So it gets embedded into their triple bottom line, which creates positive public perception as well. In Pakistan, we see a hybrid of these two approaches. There's some big companies which follow the American model, others, especially the multinationals, that are following more of the European model. Now, philanthropy as a subject is well entrenched in our society, but it's skewed mainly towards the informal sector, which reduces its potential impact on society. So there is definitely a need to formalize it. However, as regulators, we are cognizant of the fact that we are often accused of overregulation. So we have to tread a fine line between overregulation and underregulation. Here, that's why we've left it as guidelines. And we're hoping that with the combination of this hybrid approach, we will be able to have a potential impact in the S part of the ESG to ensure that the communities and the stakeholders at large with these companies benefit. There's still some thought being put into this to how to further formalize it. But for the time being, I think the guidelines are serving the purpose. And as I said, as a very philanthropic nation, it's not something that we like to be goaded towards doing the common good or mandated by the regulators. I think this is something that companies, the good corporate citizens are well aware of, and they are in a position to play their role in promoting the good for society.
Rukhsana, you're on mute.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sadia, for sharing with us the societal issue and how ESG is being integrated into the matter. My next question is for Dr. Shamshad. Doctor, how should companies be evaluating ESG to make the right ethical decisions?
How many minutes do I have? This is talking about the whole literature of ESG, but let me be short on this one. I think we are, as Sadia rightly pointed out, there's a lot that's going on the social front within Pakistan. Of course, there's variation from company to company. There are, of course, elements which are missing on the social front, which is like having a healthy wage, negotiating frameworks, getting the labor practices to be strengthened, and so on and so forth. So there are lots of dimensions which are still missing on the social front. But to me, ESG is glued by the middle element, which is the governance. The governance glues in both the issues of the workforce, be it at the working level or labor class, or at the broader HR level. If you do not have effective governance at a company level, you are never going to get right the S or the E. Now, and I'm just talking practically right now about the ESG, and there's a lot that's been written on ESG, so I'm not going to talk about what others have already known. I think the E element is very critical, and it has not been effectively exploited within the Pakistan context. And I think this debate that we are just having about decarbonization and emissions is a very critical one. And in that context, of course, we also need to pay strong attention to the governance itself. So I think ESG itself is quite ethical, but it's how we spin it around and what areas of emphasis we have at the corporate level. Now, my last point on ESG is that ESG is still evolving in Pakistan. There's a lot of theoretical stuff out there. We know if you get the ESG right, you may get your returns right. If you get the ESG right, you may attract more investors, issuers, and so on and so forth. But what's important in terms of ethical spirit within ESG is that the company embraces ESG at the board level. If you see, there is a huge body of literature which talks about the leadership of the board on ESG. And if the board gets engaged effectively, it should be seeking for strong ethical bond of the ESG elements, because currently I see within Pakistan, ESG is taught across by the CEOs, and some do it, if I may be very candid, very superficially to address a certain platform without having any substance underlying it. But some are genuinely motivated and have had corporate sustainability reports of a very high quality, which are very enjoyable to read. But there is less that has been invested by the boards themselves. And it is really in that context, I'll be very candid with you, that when obviously I started to get engaged at the PSX level, I've always been an advocate that we really need to pay attention to transforming our stock exchanges, which are pretty holistic bodies, to making sure that they are mainstreaming environment, governance, and social safeguard, irrespective of how we do it, whether we formally adopt ESG or not. But the elements are important. And unfortunately, while I have taken phenomenal interest in ESG, as all US partners may know very well, that I have found that at the company level, the corporates have not been, don't have that much ownership and have not pushed the envelope or devoted resources to implement ESG. So I'm bringing in dimensions which are not necessarily talked about, but picking up threads from the real ground realities that I have. Obviously, you can read books about ESG. There is no lack of theoretical literature on ESG, and I've tried to avoid that. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shamshad. My next question may be the last one, because after this question, we are going to start question and answer sessions. We have received few from our audience. So my next question is to Mr. Asad Hamid Khan. Asad, what kind of advantage does ESG adherence offers to companies in Pakistan? Because Pakistan is an emerging market, and obviously we have our cost concerns already because of a recent increase into cost for all the business across the field. So when we look at ESG, obviously its compliance will only increase cost, though maybe in the short term, but it will increase the cost. So what do companies do in order to reduce the cost factor of ESG compliance and survive in these challenging times?
Thank you very much, Rukhsana. So just to share with you, and you see, link it with my previous point as well, when we talk about the benefit that ESG brings to Pakistan, specifically from a corporate perspective and to the companies, is threefold in my view. One is obviously your brand and reputation. The other is your the value creation, the competitive advantage that you're able to create. And third is the resilience as a business. So what is value creation? Value creation would be that you're developing products that are ahead of their time, that meet a certain demand which is currently being generated and give you the first mover advantage. Secondly, you see the contribution that you do in terms of services to climate change or action related agendas enhances or brings you into the innovation fold. So growth, innovation coupled with obviously value creation. And you see the cost reduction or enhanced revenue generation is a key component of that. Then when we talk about brand and trust, you see businesses or any entity, even myself or as individuals, we've seen that how much a role trust plays in our interactions with our stakeholders. So as corporates, as companies, as organizations, we have a lot of stakeholders, starting with our employees. We talk about our customers, we talk about our creditors, about our investors. So with this enhanced brand and reputation, as being ESG compliant. And I think that going forward, you would see that there would be this cultural change in terms of referring to ESG adoption. I think it will be more around ESG integration. You see, compliance looks like something which is a law or is a regulatory requirement and needs to be done. Whereas this is something which is intrinsically innate or unavoidable by organizations in terms of their future strategy. So I would stick to ESG adoption and integration. And last but not the least, resilience. How we are able to ensure continuity, how we are able to mitigate any contingencies, how we are able to mitigate any recovery in situations of disaster, and converging it onto now Pakistan. You see, Pakistan is, you know, as a, I would say, global entity, is now struggling in terms of various elements. We talk about balance of payments, we talk about more reliance on imports, we talk about more reliance on a certain vertical of exports, we talk about, you see, finding foreign direct investment in Pakistan, we talk about creating products and services which are acceptable and are borderless. And so how does ESG bind all of this together into a brand which is very Pakistan centric and is able to really complement our national economic growth desires and designs? If we talk about investor preferences, so we had Mohammed Shoaib specifically mentioning that how investors are now setting up their preferences for ESG funds, how now you see globally mutual funds or investment vehicles are being formed which are ESG centric or focused. So again, you can attract the top investors in Pakistan through foreign direct investment, even through your portfolio investment. Secondly, we talk about exports. You see, the more ESG integrated and adoption is higher with our organizations, we would have more global brands finding our products worthy of their imports and we see meet their standards. And third, but obviously not the least, is in terms of how we can create this situation where the Pakistan talent, you see, Pakistan talent, if we are ESG, if the ESG knowledge is embedded, so we are a huge population, we have a lot of services oriented companies, so we can take that first mover advantage from Pakistan outside and really bring this as a implementation partner focus from a firm level or even like of ACCP, because I'll just de-link it or link ESG with our public sector work that we're doing, that how sustainability, ESG is finding its way into the reforms that are taking place globally in the public sector domain, especially public financial management, and all the best practices that if Pakistan is able to adopt, these can be exported in terms of supporting implementation across other jurisdictions like the new economies like Central Asia, emerging economies within Africa. So I'd like to stop over here. So all in all, it's an opportunity that should not be missed and is the future.
Thank you so much, Asad.
Rukhsana, if I may just compliment for 1 second Asad's response. I think what's important is that all export-oriented corporates adopt ESG right away, because it will now be a requirement when they are exporting to show their compliance with the ESG. Second, if you want to attract FDI and long-term institutional investment, you have to be compliant with the ESG, but because that's the international direction in which we are going. So these are two imperatives that have to be also factored in. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shamshad, for putting additional words about ESG effectiveness and how it can be a long-term goal for the Pakistan from the export-oriented companies. We open the forum now for a few questions. I think we have some time left. My first question is for Ms. Sadia Khan. This is about increasing awareness about regulations amongst the masses on which regulations are applicable. How can this be a cost-effective procedure? What can be done to ensure that it's not just transmission of the message, rather the receivers understand it and are ready to implement the regulations in their day-to-day activities? Ms. Sadia.
Thank you, Rukhsana. I think I'll refer to Sajid's initial comments. The simplicity of the message, the viability, and the pace with which we proceed. I think that is key, and that really struck a chord with me because that's exactly in line with our own thinking as well. We have to make the messaging very simple. And not only simple, this is something that has to be attuned with what I earlier mentioned as a business case. They have to understand that this is in their self-interest to implement and to agitate for if they are the investors, and to implement if they are the companies. Because without the buy-in, anything that we do on the regulatory side becomes a box-ticking exercise. Unless there's buy-in, there's general interest, general concern, general awareness, we will not be able to implement it to the extent that we would want to do that. So we have to simplify the message, how to do it cost-effectively. That can happen only if we join hands with all the stakeholders. And even through this medium, the conferences, the seminars, there's one way to spread the word, but also, of course, there has to be a detailed media campaign. I believe the SCCP, as part of its roadmap, is going to be going on a roadshow and looking at different stakeholders and trying to convey the message according to their particular interests in the subject. And we do want all the stakeholders, and as I mentioned, the ESG task force itself comprises of all the relevant stakeholders. So we'll hope to tie hands with them as well to organize these mass awareness drives. But nothing succeeds like success. I think it's very important for us to be able to demonstrate the success with some early adopters, those who have been at the forefront of reporting on sustainability, adopting them, to showcase how they've been able to attract the foreign investment, how they've been successful in satisfying the stakeholders, making case studies. That's why it's not just for the regulators, it's for the corporate sector as well as academia to join hands and to try and advocate that this is really something that it's in everybody's interest to do. So cost effectiveness aside, that's something that we have learned to do with least cost because as regulators, we don't have access to that many funds, but it is something that we generally want to join hands with all the stakeholders and try and spread the word. And as I said, to simplify the message as much as possible and to discuss the viability of the proposals with the stakeholders so there is genuine buy-in going forward.
Thank you, Ms. Sadia. We have time for one last question, and this question is for Dr. Shamshad. The question is, Dr. Shamshad highlighted the cost of sustainability adoption for larger organizations and the need for hand-holding smaller business in their supply chain. How is the government planning to encourage and financially support small business in this regard? Dr. Shamshad.
Okay, I would prefer government doesn't get involved in it. I'm sorry to be so explicit. And that is why ESG is really a private sector platform, since I was asked by my respective boards to coordinate this. I made sure we had private representatives and the companies out there. The reason why I say that, because the more we try to handhold the SMEs, the more distortions we seem to be bringing in the industrial framework. The best bet for us would be, and that's where public policy can play an important role, to make sure that it tries to enhance more and more small and medium enterprise financing and encourage more and more through moral suasion the banks to provide the required funding to the SMEs. As you know, banks have very low advanced deposit ratios. And if you were to dissect it, the share going to the SMEs is pathetically low. So the more we are able to channel the funding, the better it would be. I would not advocate necessarily subsidized lending, but I would advocate credit enhancement for the SMEs. The second important point from the private sector perspective is that today, all the private companies, by and large, are dependent on small and medium enterprises. And their value chain has to be compliant eventually with the ESG standards if we are going to go by the book. So I can tell you some of the large corporates that I have studied have huge dependence on the small and medium enterprises in these congested localities. We're sitting in Karachi, at least myself, and if you go to Mansoor Colony, all the SMEs, and they are very small businesses, they are suppliers of very high quality furniture and products to the large enterprises. Now, they need to be supported by the large corporates. That hand-holding would be very critical. And by that, I mean that large corporates have to be good citizens and adopt good governance and pass on the gains to the small and medium enterprises, because that's where your social index will improve and your governance will improve. And you have to make sure that the localities are cleaned up and they have basic water and renewable energy sources. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shamshad, for answering the question. That's the end of time we had today to discuss ESG from the regulatory compliance, regulatory lens. And it was a very fruitful discussion where Dr. Shamshad highlighted the setup of ESG task force. Ms. Sadia shared with us what SCCP is doing. Asad Hamid shared with us the education perspective about what ACCA is doing to increase the awareness, and Mr. Shoaib shared with us what AMCs are doing to encourage ESG investment and ESG perspective into the companies, as well as Mr. Mahmood Khwaja, who shared with us his thoughts about cybersecurity and governance structure. In order to conclude the session, I'll hand it over to Ali Shan, who would further give his comments. To you, Ali Shan.
Thank you very much, Rukhsana, for wonderfully moderating the panel discussion, and a special thank you to Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, Mr. Asad Amir Khan, Mr. Mohammad Shoaib, Ms. Sadia Khan, and Mr. Mahmood Khwaja. Before closing the session, just two things that I wanted to mention. Firstly, specifically for our ACCA members who had registered for this event through the ACC PD Hub, just wanted to reiterate that this is a CPT session. All the 4 sessions comprise of 1.5 hours each, only if you registered and are viewing this through the ACC PD Hub link. That in case the audience, the members who are watching this on Facebook, I would request them to kindly register through the ACC PD Hub so that they can also get their CPD certificates a few days after the sessions end. Lastly, as I had mentioned earlier during the start of the conversation, that this is the first of a 4 panel discussion series, and our next session will be starting at 6 p.m. Pakistan Standard Time on the topic enabling Pakistan digital transformation and ethics. So I would request all our audience to kindly stay tuned and do tune into our ACC Pakistan Facebook page at 6 p.m. to view the next session. So once again, thank you very much. And last but not the least, special thank you to our supporting partners who have supported us during this entire event. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you in the next session. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Allah Hafiz.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to ACCA. All the best.
Allah Hafiz.
Thank you.